Have you ever noticed the haunting emptiness in certain adults' eyes, that inexplicable old soul quality that doesn't match their age? Neuroscience reveals that childhood trauma literally rewires the brain, creating neural pathways that remain for decades. Like a delicate sapling forced to bear the weight of a collapsing building, these children develop thick emotional bark and deep survival roots while sacrificing their natural growth pattern forever. Today, I promise you'll understand this phenomenon like never before, because as Isaac Newton discovered with his third law of motion, for every emotional burden placed on a child, there's an equal and opposite reaction that extends into adulthood. And this invisible force is silently shaping your entire life. You see it in the most responsible people you know, the ones who never ask for help, who handle everything, who seem unnaturally capable. Behind that competence lies a child who was never allowed to be a child. Isaac Newton's principles of emotional motion are at work here, creating patterns that persist unless deliberately interrupted. Today, we'll map that journey together. When a household crisis erupts, whether addiction, mental illness, divorce, or poverty, a psychological vacuum forms. Nature abhors a vacuum, as Newton taught us, and someone must fill the void of stability. Tragically, children with their exquisite sensitivity often step forward. Studies show that by age 7, a child's brain has developed enough empathy to perceive others' emotional states, but lacks the maturity to process these emotions properly. It's like handing the controls of a commercial airliner to someone who's only watched pilots from the passenger seat. They'll grip the yoke with determination, but lack the training for the turbulence ahead. The transformation happens silently. The child begins anticipating others' needs, moderating their own emotions, becoming hyper-aware of subtle shifts in the emotional atmosphere. They become little adults, praised for maturity that's actually a trauma response. A Harvard study revealed that children in these roles experience cortisol patterns mirroring combat veterans, their bodies literally in a state of constant readiness. This isn't development, it's adaptation for survival. Remember Julie, the 32-year-old executive who manages millions flawlessly, yet feels like an imposter in her own life. She wasn't born managing others' emotions. She was conscripted into that role at age 6, when her mother's depression meant someone had to run the household. Take a moment to recall if you were ever praised for being so mature as a child. What parts of yourself did you have to hide away to maintain family harmony? What happens physiologically when a child assumes an adult role prematurely? Isaac Newton's first law explains it perfectly. A child at rest tends to develop naturally, but a child forced into motion along an unnatural path will continue in that direction unless acted upon by an external force. Neuroscience confirms this. When children repeatedly suppress their needs to attend to others, their brains physically restructure. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for emotional regulation, overdevelops, while areas for play and joy remain underdeveloped. These children become like desert plants, able to survive on minimal emotional nourishment, developing elaborate systems for extracting every drop of safety from a harsh environment, yet never experiencing the lushness of growing in properly nurturing soil. This rewiring manifests in 3 primary survival mechanisms: hypervigilance, emotional suppression, and premature independence. The hypervigilant child becomes adept at reading micro-expressions, anticipating needs, and diffusing potential conflicts before they arise. They're constantly scanning for danger. The emotionally suppressive child learns that their feelings are inconvenient or dangerous, pushing them down until they become strangers to their own emotions. The prematurely independent child believes asking for help is a weakness, a burden on already overwhelmed adults. I once worked with Michael, a brilliant surgeon whose hands never trembled in the operating room, but who couldn't accept comfort when his own father died. Consider which of these mechanisms feels most familiar to you. How might these childhood adaptations be affecting your adult relationships today? Here lies the cruel irony that Isaac Newton would have recognized as an emotional paradox. The very adaptations that allow the child to survive become the limitations that prevent the adult from thriving. Your competence becomes your prison. Research at Columbia University found that adults who experience childhood parentification score significantly higher on tests for empathy and crisis management, yet significantly lower on measures of self-compassion and ability to receive care. You've become like a mighty dam, expertly managing the flow of everyone else's emotions while your own needs pool behind concrete walls, pressure building with nowhere to release. This manifests in peculiar ways. The sensation that you're performing your life rather than living it, feeling responsible for others' emotions while disconnected from your own, excelling at solving problems but struggling to celebrate success, believing rest must be earned through exhaustion. Consider Emma, who navigated her father's alcoholism by becoming the perfect student, perfect employee, and perfect partner, only to experience crushing panic attacks when her performance faltered. The cost of premature responsibility isn't paid in childhood. The invoice arrives in adulthood, often as anxiety, depression, chronic fatigue, or relationship difficulties. Take 3 deep breaths and notice if your body tenses at the thought of not being in control. What would happen if you allowed yourself to be as imperfect as you allow others to be? Isaac Newton's second law of motion states that force equals mass times acceleration. In emotional terms, the impact of childhood parentification equals the severity of the responsibility multiplied by how quickly it was thrust upon you. Developmental psychologists have found that the younger the child and the more sudden the role reversal, the more profound the long-term effects. This isn't merely psychological, it's physiological. Brain scans show altered activity in the amygdala and hippocampus of adults who experience this phenomenon, creating a heightened threat response and difficulty fully experiencing positive emotions. Your nervous system became like a security system installed during a break-in, hyper-alert, interpreting even benign events as potential dangers, sounding alarms when there's nothing to fear. This altered emotional physics creates distinctive patterns, difficulty receiving compliments because they conflict with your core belief of unworthiness, feeling anxious when things are going well because peace feels unfamiliar and therefore suspect, being drawn to chaos or crisis because it's where you learn to excel, gravitating toward relationships where you can caretake rather than be cared for. Think of Rachel, who found herself repeatedly attracted to partners with addiction issues, unconsciously recreating her childhood dynamic with her alcoholic mother. She was most comfortable when needed, most uncomfortable when nurtured. This isn't coincidence, it's emotional physics in action. Place your hand over your heart and say, "My worth exists independent of what I can do for others." Indeed, how might your childhood adaptations be influencing your choice of relationships today? The children who grow up too quickly develop sophisticated masks that Newton might have called forces of protective deception. These aren't conscious fabrications, but necessary shields. Research from the University of Michigan found that these adults often exhibit high-functioning external presentations while experiencing significant internal distress, a phenomenon known as masked depression. This external-internal split creates a profound sense of imposter syndrome. You become like an accomplished actor who has played a role so convincingly that you've lost the script to your authentic self, able to recite every line of being together while forgetting how to speak your own truth. These masks typically manifest as 4 distinct archetypes: the perfect achiever who proves worth through accomplishment, the invisible mediator who disappears to maintain peace, the constant caretaker who anticipates everyone's needs except their own, and the invulnerable rock who never displays weakness. Each mask served a vital purpose in childhood. They helped you survive, but now they're suffocating your authentic self. Consider Thomas, the successful attorney who maintained immaculate control in the courtroom, but couldn't allow himself a single tear at his wedding, despite profound joy. His invulnerable rock mask, developed during his mother's illness when he was 8, had fused with his identity. Notice which archetype resonates most strongly with you. What would become possible in your life if you could set down this mask, even momentarily? Isaac Newton's law of gravitational attraction helps explain why those who grew up too quickly often find themselves in repeating relationship patterns. Just as objects with mass attract each other with a force proportional to that mass, humans with unhealed wounds are drawn toward relationships that feel weightily familiar, even when painful. Attachment research confirms this. We recreate what we know, not necessarily what's healthy. Studies from the Gottman Institute show that adults who experience parentification typically engage in one of two relationship extremes, either becoming super caretakers who never allow themselves to be vulnerable or avoiding deep connection altogether. Your heart operates like a planet with an irregular orbit, pulled strongly toward those who need you, but veering sharply away from those who might care for you, creating elliptical relationships where you're either too close or too distant. This manifests as specific patterns, difficulty expressing needs because they were suppressed for so long, feeling trapped between craving intimacy and fearing dependency, becoming the emotional manager in relationships, experiencing anxiety when receiving care rather than giving it. Consider Sophia, who handled her family's finances at age 12 during her parents' bitter divorce. 20 years later, she found herself repeatedly attracting financially irresponsible partners, unconsciously recreating her childhood dynamic where she felt valued for fixing others' problems. The painful truth is that many who grew up too quickly are more comfortable giving care than receiving it. Ask yourself, when was the last time I allowed someone to really take care of me? What would a relationship based on mutual care rather than one-sided caretaking look like in your life? Newton's understanding of how invisible forces manifest in the physical world helps explain why emotional parentification eventually materializes in the body. Recent research in psychoneuroimmunology demonstrates that chronic childhood stress literally alters immune function, inflammatory responses, and cellular aging. Adults who grew up too quickly show statistically higher rates of autoimmune disorders, chronic fatigue, digestive issues, and tension-related pain. Your body has become like a loyal soldier that never received the message that the war ended, continuing to mount defenses against threats that no longer exist, exhausting its resources, fighting battles that ended years ago. These physical manifestations typically cluster around three systems: the nervous system, anxiety, insomnia, hypervigilance; the digestive system, IBS, food sensitivities, chronic discomfort; and the muscular system, tension headaches, jaw clenching, back pain. Consider David, a teacher who developed crippling migraines every weekend after maintaining perfect composure all week in the classroom, his body's way of releasing the tension he'd been holding. His migraines began at age 9, coinciding with when he became his younger sibling's primary caretaker after his father's abandonment. His pediatrician found nothing physically wrong, yet the pain was debilitatingly real. Isaac Newton would recognize this as the physical manifestation of emotional force. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. The stress you couldn't process transformed into physical symptoms. Place your hand where you feel tension most often in your body and breathe deeply into that space. What might your body be trying to communicate through its symptoms? The journey back to yourself follows principles that would intrigue Isaac Newton himself. It requires understanding the precise forces that shaped you before you can alter your trajectory. Psychological research from the University of California found that healing from premature responsibility follows a predictable sequence. Acknowledgement of the lost childhood, grieving what was missed, and conscious reclamation of suppressed needs and desires. This isn't regression, it's completion. The healing process resembles archaeological work, carefully excavating buried aspects of yourself, brushing away years of protective covering, handling with reverence parts that have been hidden, and finally restoring them to their proper place in your life's museum. First comes awareness, recognizing the patterns without judgment, then validation, acknowledging that your adaptations were brilliant survival strategies, not character flaws. Next is grieving, feeling the sadness for experiences missed and needs unmet. Finally, there's integration, consciously developing new patterns that serve your adult life. Consider James, who recognized at 40 that his compulsive need to solve everyone's problems stemmed from mediating his parents' violent conflicts as a child. His healing began with simply noticing his automatic rescuing behavior, then honoring the child who developed that strategy, grieving the childhood he lost, and finally practicing the uncomfortable art of allowing others to solve their own problems. Write down one childhood joy you missed that you could reclaim now. What would the child version of you need to hear from your adult self today? Just as Isaac Newton's laws describe how objects resist changes to their motion, your established patterns resist transformation. Neuroplasticity research demonstrates why neural pathways established in childhood become deeply myelinated, insulated for efficient transmission, making them default responses even when no longer appropriate. This is why intellectually understanding your patterns rarely changes them. Harvard neuroscientist Dr. Bessel van der Kolk confirms that healing requires embodied experiences, not just cognitive insights. Your early adaptations are like a river that has carved a deep canyon through the landscape of your psyche. Water naturally continues flowing through these established channels unless you deliberately create new pathways through consistent, conscious redirection. The relearning process involves specific practices, recognizing emotional boundaries, what feelings belong to you versus others, identifying and expressing needs you've habitually suppressed, experiencing emotions without managing them, allowing imperfection without shame, receiving support without compensation. Consider Elaine, whose mother's chronic illness made her the family caretaker at age 8. 30 years later, she would become physically ill whenever someone offered help, her body literally rejecting nurturing as if it were a threat. Her healing involved gradually tolerating small acts of care, a friend bringing dinner, a colleague helping with a project, each time noticing and soothing her instinctive resistance. This isn't merely personal development, it's neurobiological rewiring. As Isaac Newton might observe, emotional patterns at rest tend to stay at rest unless acted upon by intentional force. Practice saying aloud, "I am allowed to need things from others." What would become possible if receiving care felt as natural as giving it? Isaac Newton recognized that transformation requires applying the right force in the right direction. The most powerful interrupter of premature responsibility patterns is consistent, small actions that contradict your established narrative. Research in habit formation from University College London shows that neural pathways begin shifting after just 66 days of consistent alternative behaviors. This isn't about dramatic changes, but daily micro-practices. Your healing process resembles redirecting a massive ship at sea. Tiny, consistent adjustments to the rudder eventually alter the entire vessel's course, but the change appears imperceptible until one day you look up and find yourself in entirely new waters. Your weekly practice requires 3 components: awareness, noticing when old patterns activate; interruption, pausing the automatic response; and deliberate choice, selecting a new action. Monday through Wednesday, focus on awareness. Simply notice when you automatically take responsibility for others' emotions, solve problems that aren't yours, or suppress your needs. Thursday through Saturday, practice interruption. When you notice the pattern, take 3 deep breaths before responding. Sunday, implement choice. Consciously do something different, however small. Perhaps ask for help with a minor task. Express a preference when usually you'd say, whatever you want, or allow someone to comfort you when you typically self-soothe. These small acts may feel insignificant, but they're rewiring your fundamental relationship with yourself and others. Choose one small way you'll interrupt your caretaking pattern this week. What becomes possible when you hold yourself with the same compassion you've always shown others? You navigated adult responsibilities with a child's resources, developing extraordinary strengths alongside profound wounds. Isaac Newton would recognize the emotional physics at work, how early forces shaped your trajectory in ways that persist into adulthood. But his laws also reveal that new forces, consistently applied, can alter any object's path. Your adaptations were never character flaws. They were brilliant survival strategies created by a mind too young to have better options. And now, with adult resources and awareness, you can honor that child's ingenuity while creating new possibilities. When you understand this journey, from premature responsibility to conscious reclamation, you recognize that your healing doesn't diminish your strengths. You don't lose your competence, empathy, or resilience. You simply release the exhaustion of constant vigilance, the loneliness of perpetual giving, the emptiness of performing instead of being. You discover that vulnerability isn't weakness, but courage, that imperfection isn't failure, but humanity, that receiving isn't selfish, but necessary, and perhaps most importantly, you find that the child who never got to be a child still lives within you, waiting for permission to play, to rest, to simply be rather than do.